Yeah, I think some of the most important items or key aspects you should consider is, one is ColdFusion supported. Is it supported at the application layer? Is it supported at the server layer? Are they helping you with your the various updates that come out? So, there's been a slew of hot fixes recently. Are they patching that, proactively and doing the testing for you and keeping you informed? I think that's one really important piece. Are they giving you access to the ColdFusion server itself, such as like the administrator to create your data sources and, see what's really going on within your ColdFusion environment? I think is an important question everyone should ask. In addition to that, I think ColdFusion upgrade protection is really important as well. So is every major release of ColdFusion supported? Do you have an easy path between the different versions where you can test, roll back, move forward? I think those are all some really key items. Ryan, feel free to add anything else. But
yeah, I think Adobe's got a list of cloud providers on our website. So going there, using one of those cloud providers gives you that upgrade protection, because we all have access to the cloud enterprise licenses. So you get that baked in. So it's a great option to kind of pick one of those go-to partners.
ColdFusion Alive, the podcast for the ColdFusion community. Discover practices, tools, techniques, tips, and trends for modern ColdFusion development. Brought to you by TerraTech, the ColdFusion experts. Develop, secure, optimize. Here is your host, the founder of TerraTech, Michaela Light.
Welcome back to the show. I'm here with Dakota Clum and Ryan Brown from XByte, and we're going to be talking about ColdFusion hosting options and what you should be very careful of when picking a ColdFusion host, and what's new in the ColdFusion hosting world this year. So welcome, Dakota and Ryan.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
And Dakota's the CTO at XByte Hosting. He's been involved in ColdFusion hosting for over 15 years, and he loves helping organizations with enterprise cloud solutions. And Ryan has been doing IT for 28 years, and he's the Chief Marketing Officer for XByte Hosting. So great to see you both here. And I'll put their emails and LinkedIn and any other good links that we dream up into the show notes at terratech.com. So I guess I'm curious, what is new in ColdFusion hosting this year?
Well, XByte, that's new. We're new on the scene, shaking things up a little bit. So we've got tons of experience backing us, but we're new to the company is new to the scene. So we're new as of the beginning of this year, coming out there, shaking things up. And then of course, Adobe moving to one a release every year. That's exciting.
Yes, I learned that in a previous episode with Kishore from Adobe. What are both of your reactions to the shift to annual releases?
Yeah, I think it's a great commitment from Adobe, and investment into ColdFusion, which we all know and love. We're certainly excited to see it continue growing and continue being supported. And it's generated a lot of talk with our client base. So lots of excitement all around.
With the pace of technology, you almost have to go annual releases nowadays. To say the CF is alive, you've got to go to that. So to have the actual modern application to be updating every 2 years, you're already behind.
Yeah, there's a lot of new technology coming out, and I believe the pace of technology change has been increasing. I saw some data on that said 100 years of changes used to take 100 years in technology. That was the last century, but this century, it took about 10 years for the next 100 years worth of changes and patents and innovations. And then it took the next lot was maybe 5 years, and now it's 3 years. I sort of feel the innovations are going to come out before the dates change on the calendar next. It's like accelerating.
Yeah.
So definitely good move to go to annual releases. And of course, Lucy CFML has, they have a bit of a weird release schedule because they have these monthly rollouts on point releases where they add, new features and fix stuff. But then their, major point release, they seem to have been a bit slower on in the past. They're just rolling out version 6 this year. So I think on both the Adobe side and the Lucy side, there's things to learn from each other on release cycles.
Yeah. It's always good to have that competition.
Yeah, it's definitely good to have friendly competition. And I started a discussion on LinkedIn about, what do people think about features in Lucy and Adobe ColdFusion, and should they be synchronized or should each of them innovate? And the consensus seemed to be it's fine, they both innovate, and when the market picks out features that are good, the other one can implement that feature and vice versa. So and there is cooperation on their technical level between their two evangelists, Mark and Zach. They kind of keep the languages moderately in sync, so they're pretty compatible.
Yeah.
Do you guys? Go ahead, Brian.
I was you have Apple on the phones. You have Apple and Samsung, and they push each other. So whenever you have two good heavyweights out there, you'll innovate faster.
Absolutely. So, or even more than two.
Yeah,
we used to have some other versions of ColdFusion out there with Blue Dragon. Let's talk about what is important when choosing a ColdFusion host. So, what are your thoughts on what people should look at when they're picking a ColdFusion host? And let's just keep it independent of XByte. This is for any selection.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think some of the most important items or key aspects you should consider is, one is ColdFusion supported. Is it supported at the application layer? Is it supported at the server layer? Are they helping you with your the various updates that come out? So, there's been a slew of hot fixes recently. Are they patching that, proactively and doing the testing for you and keeping you informed? I think that's one really important piece. Are they giving you access to the ColdFusion server itself, such as like the administrator to create your data sources and, see what's really going on within your ColdFusion environment? I think is an important question everyone should ask. In addition to that, I think ColdFusion upgrade protection is really important as well. So is every major release of ColdFusion supported? Do you have an easy path between the different versions where you can test, roll back, move forward? I think those are all some really key items. Ryan, feel free to add anything else. But
yeah, I think Adobe's got a list of cloud providers on our website. So going there, using one of those cloud providers gives you that upgrade protection because we all have access to the cloud enterprise licenses. So you get that baked in. So it's a great option to kind of pick one of those go-to partners.
I'm just going to add into that list. I think security is important. You mentioned hot fixes, but security in general. And then also reliability. Does the server stay up? And then under support, how quickly does the host respond to support requests, particularly if your site is down? I've heard good stories among hosting companies of customers, getting quick response and the site was helped to get back up quickly. And I've heard terrible stories where things took days. So I think that's quite important for a lot of people. And of course, price is another consideration that a lot of people take into account, though I think for enterprise customers, that's not usually the top of their list. So,
yeah, you mentioned security, and especially in light of the recent patches from Adobe on their engine, being able to make sure that your providers being able to upgrade you quickly to limit your vulnerabilities from anyone making use of those exploits.
Yeah, I mean, some hosts have extra software, a web application firewall or some other thing, that helps keep naughty attempts out of the Cold, from even reaching ColdFusion. And I know we use some of Pete Freitag's tools for security. So now those are things anyone, it doesn't matter who you're hosted with, you could get those. But do you guys use any security tools to help tighten things up, or?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we employ our own edge level firewall that's monitoring and filtering inbound requests, particularly looking for actively exploited items and kind of being familiar with what's going on in the wild. So those are blocked proactively. We have endpoint protection on all of our servers. That's really giving you that additional peace of mind when you're hosting somewhere. So.
What does endpoint protection mean? I haven't heard that phrase before for security.
Yeah, so any ColdFusion server environment you can think of, or ColdFusion installation, we have a endpoint or a security endpoint on each device that's actively monitoring for any attacks or exploits or DDoSes at the network layer, the file level. So you could call it an antivirus as well.
So it's monitoring packets and behavior.
Yes.
Sounds like, yeah. Okay, well, very cool. I do think a lot of people looking for hosting security, particularly in the government or enterprise space, they're very interested in security. And this is one of the reasons some organizations use ColdFusion, because of the excellent record Adobe and Lucy have for, addressing security holes quickly. So, and being transparent in the process. So,
absolutely. Yeah.
And I saw.
This podcast is brought to you by TerraTech, the ColdFusion experts. Develop, secure, optimize. Get detailed show notes on today's episode and your free CF Alive Modern ColdFusion Guide at terratech.com. That is TerraTech.com. And now back to today's show.
Yeah,
I saw an article out there that when Adobe published their patches, no one likes to see your software in the news of any kind, but they were excited because, okay, it's fixed. It's not just, hey, there's an exploit, but hey, exploit and fix. Well, and fix and fix. But yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a tricky thing where, I think it is important to do what Adobe does, and they publicly say they found something, they fixed it, and and then everyone's dashing around to apply the fixes, so which is probably a good thing. Particularly as one of them, the last bunch of holes that were found, one of them was a day zero issue, so which means no one really knew about it until it was revealed. So very interesting. So I'm just stepping back a bit. What currently are the different ways you can host a ColdFusion app?
Yeah, I mean, everyone kind of knows. Okay, hey, you have there's an on-prem, of course. There's the traditional where you just own your own server, and you're getting the standard license for that. And then when you get into cloud, it gets a little more complicated. You're going to have something like a shared hosting model where you're actually sharing the resources with a bunch of people, and so that comes at a much cheaper price. So that's appealing for people. But because you're also using shared resources, it can easily, I shouldn't say easily, there's definitely an opportunity for another one of the people on your shared box to eat up all the resources and take down any of the people on that shared box. And so if people, it's happened several times to them, they end up, and it's a production environment, then they end up wanting to go to something more with dedicated resources. And so that's kind of the next step up, is when you get into the dedicated, and you can call that VPS, virtual private server. You can call it a cloud server, a dedicated cloud server, any of those. But it's where it's still a cloud server, so it still has the resiliency of having multiple instances up and running of the server, So it's not like a physical box, but they're all virtual. So you're not at the whim of your own box having a power supply outage or anything. You're clustered in your environment, but you have dedicated resources in that. So that's going to be your cloud server or virtual server. That you also do have dedicated servers. So I mentioned in the beginning the on-prem server. Well, you can take that on-prem server that you may have had in your own data center and put it in someone else's data center, and it's just hosted for you. The advantage of that over just taking your own server is the fact that you can pay monthly for that. So that's a big benefit if you do want to have your own box and kind of control that. And so maybe you want to create your own cluster of some kind. You can get that dedicated box and still have a monthly payment. So that's another form of dedicated, but it's not on the cloud server. It's actually dedicated hardware for you. You have Docker containers. Some people go into the companies where they'll split it. So they'll want more of a hybrid solution provider where they're going to offer some of their applications may need to be on-prem for security reasons or for performance reasons or whatever it is. They need to have local access to that environment. And so we've talked to people who have that, and they've identified, hey, we can't move this based on dependencies. We can't move it, but we do want to move other pieces of our infrastructure. So we can support that.
The other reason I've seen for people having stuff on premises is they have some other legacy, ERM or database or something, and they just want the application to be next door to it. So that's one of the other things, rather than drilling through a firewall to connect to it, which obviously runs slow. Right. And honestly, a lot of it's because that was the traditional way of doing hosting 20 years ago, that you have your own server and you install ColdFusion on it, and people, are just slow to change. So I think, to be honest, these days, either a VPS server that's dedicated for your own app or apps, or going into an Amazon, Google, or Microsoft cloud type thing. Or if you're using Docker, it could be any cloud provider. It doesn't really matter, because sometimes Amazon charges quite a lot of money for all those instances. So it can add up, because they charge I don't know if they charge by the minute or the hour. I forget. I think it's the minute usually. Though the other thing with those, whatever you want to call them, those big cloud providers, they now, in the case of Amazon, you can go to the store for AWS and just pay for ColdFusion by the hour. So if you have a cluster, you don't have to be paying for all the cluster all the time. For the VPS option, are there clustering options there, or?
Yeah. So to your specific question about the clustering options, we take a little bit of a different approach, but there's a lot of similarities. We do something called load balancing. And what we'll do is we can provision a certain set amount of resources based on your demands and your needs. And we can balance requests between, let's say it's 2 ColdFusion servers or 50. That is completely doable. One of the things we offer, and that we found other hosting providers offer compared to like an AWS or an Azure, is that fixed pricing, where you can be assured of, hey, what's my monthly bill going to be, all the time. Azure and AWS, the scalability is there, which is great. And, that hourly model works in a lot of cases, but that pricing point can fluctuate. But yeah, we've had scenarios where, we've supported both types of solutions, and it's worked great for us. But.
Yeah, with the clustering, you have, as Dakota mentioned, you have the web server clustering. If you need it, you can even do SQL clustering. So you can do that both on and then this is global for everybody. This is not something special that Expite necessarily does, but you can, as you're doing with SQL clustering, you've got to make sure you have the correct license for that. So you've got to have your SQL Standard Edition or Enterprise Edition. when you're looking at cloud providers, a lot of them will have web edition just because of the pricing of it, but that can't be clustered from a Microsoft licensing standpoint. There's also options for MySQL. So if you wanted to go MySQL, Dakota and I were just talking earlier today about some Galera clusters for MySQL. So those are options as well if you wanted to get into something like that, and that can be on the VPS side.
Yeah, I remember there's a different build of MySQL. I'm spacing out on the name right this second, but you can
have Community
those.
Edition versus
no, it had some other name. Never mind. I'll look it up and stick it in the show notes. But yeah, you can, with this database clustering, you can either have log shipping between the database servers, or you can have one be a backup and the other that's replicated. So there are different ways you can set it up. But the basic idea of clustering, for those who haven't done it, is just that you have several servers providing either the database records, or in the case of ColdFusion, serving up requests to people. And if one of them goes down, the other one can take over. Or if there's extra demand because you just ran a Super Bowl ad for your website or something, then you can spread out the load between several servers. It also, in my experience, makes doing updates and hot fixes easier, because you can take one server out of the cluster, you can apply whatever the Windows or ColdFusion or SQL Server fixes are, reboot it. It doesn't affect the application. It just keeps chugging along. I mean, you may still do it after hours because there's less load on the site, but if you have a 24/7 mission critical app, then clustering is definitely a good thing to be considering. So,
you have clustering. You also have geo failover. So if you're worried about one data center potentially having an issue, you may want to also have a failover to another data center. So that's kind of taking the clustering to a higher scale when you're doing that replication across multiple. I guess you probably want to go multiple data centers or multiple providers. Some people may even want to have some sort of replication amongst, let's say, a public cloud versus a private cloud, where you have some options to kind of say, hey, look, if, let's say for us, if Xbyte, something that happened to one of our data centers, then you could have failover to AWS. Gives it added protection.
Yeah, that's a great thing to do. Have it just in case a tornado or something hit one of the data centers. The other reason people do different data centers is maybe they have customers spread, some in Europe and some in America or Asia, and they want to spread out, get the processing happening nearer to the customers. And then there may also be data processing things, like some European laws require that data to be processed in Europe, and they get upset if you process it somewhere else. So, yeah, seems a bit like 19th century to me, but that's just my view as an American.
Didn't they just have some sort of a European US agreement on data protection? I thought there was
maybe.
In the last month or two, I thought I heard they came to some agreement on data transfers between the two continents.
Okay, yeah, it could well. But if you find that later, let me know, and I'll put it in the show notes for folks. Wouldn't amaze me, but I do know. I have talked to some people who, yes, they must have it hosted in a particular location, or sometimes. Some American organizations must have it hosted in the United States because they're part of the government or some other such thing. So the other kind of thing that's kind of separate from the hosting layer is some kind of caching front end, and one of the more popular ones is Cloudflare, that just provides caching, and it's local to the person for the images and the JavaScript and any of the other front end stuff that you could cache out. So that's another thing to consider as well when you're building things.
Cloudflare's been we're seeing a wider demand for it. It's being brought up more frequently, obviously with their global footprint, bringing a very important aspect. But Cloudflare actually offers some load balancing capabilities now that are really effective. So, when you think about your visitors coming to your site and taking the fastest path to the server, Cloudflare is really streamlining that. So we're seeing a lot of great momentum there.
Yeah, I saw they had a load balancing service. It wasn't that expensive. It will flip between different servers you set up,
Yeah.
I don't think we need to dig into all the different options people do with ColdFusion clustering, but just to tell people, if you're thinking of doing it, you need to look into, how's your application going to deal with people changing servers? Are they going to stay sticky servers? They stay on the first server they went to, or is it round robin that like the next request goes to the next least busy server, or what's the criteria? Because a lot of application code isn't really cluster ready. So in my experience,
that is very true. Yes.
Yeah. You mentioned some of these hosting options, you can have your own Adobe license, and some of them that the hosting company provides it. Tell us a bit more about that issue.
Yeah, with if you're not dealing with an actual Adobe cloud provider, then they're not going to have access to Adobe's cloud license, and so you're going to have to bring your own license at that point. As I mentioned, if you can go to Adobe's site, or you can Google Adobe hosting partners, you'll see their list of companies. There's a great company listed first. It's last in the alphabet, listed first on the page. You can check it out. That's a great place to kind of start to kind of look at people, and they're gonna have access to that. And that gives you, I think Dakota mentioned, it gives you the upgrade protection, because you can include in that cloud license or upgrades or updates. But you can also, if there is going to be a small surcharge for that, of course, for the Adobe license. So if you've already paid for it and you're not ready to upgrade yet, then you can bring your own license, and so you can save a few dollars at least in the beginning, and then before your next big upgrade, you can get onto the cloud license and have that upgrade protection kind of built into that. But you are also paying every month. So if you're someone we just talked to someone who was using an Access 97 database, then you may want to pay for it once and not pay for it every month. But if you want to kind of stick with something modern, you probably want to get into some ability to upgrade.
Yeah. I mean, the advantage of paying a hosting company for license, I think there are several advantages. One is you pay per month instead of having to put down the whole license cost in one go. I also get the impression that honestly, Adobe gives some kind of hosting company discount to hosting companies on licensing because of the volume of licensing they provide. So I think you get a better deal on it. And then, as you mentioned, you don't have to worry about upgrading costs, because that's all built into it. So I think unless you've got your own license, it makes sense to have a hosting company deal with that. Oh, there's one other Adobe licensing issue. They count CPUs in a very weird way, in my opinion. They probably wrote the license, probably their attorneys wrote the license 10 years ago when like the CPUs were very rare. But now, I mean, how many CPUs cores do you have on typical servers, either your hosting company or other hosting companies? 16 or? I mean,
Dakota, I don't even know. I don't know if we can talk about the number of cores for each CPU, but I mean, we have access to 28 core CPUs. Mm-hmm. So it's amazing what they're doing now, and the core count. I mean, and I think AMD is even leading the core count race. Trying to kind of, if I recall correctly, they're trying to push that number of cores.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's what I think what's traditional kind of in the hosting is, you see them start as low as 2, and now you can even see it get all the way up to 128 cores, 64 cores. So that scene has definitely shifted. Right in the middle, or the sweet spot, is typically that 16 core, 8 core portion.
And I think the other thing is if you're running in a virtual situation, if you're running a VPS, you're running on Amazon AWS or Azure or whatever, you may not know how many cores are running underneath it, or it may be hard to tell. So it's kind of hard to obey the licensing if you're bringing your own license in that situation. Of course, with Lucy open source ColdFusion, that's not an issue at all because they don't have that way of licensing their CFML engine. So that's why a lot of people moving to Docker, did switch to Lucy for that, just for that reason. They may have had other reasons as well. So something to look at. You mentioned earlier about how a part of the support a hosting company provides, they may be providing tuning and optimization of your ColdFusion app. Can you tell us a bit more about that and what to look for there when we're picking a hosting company?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one of the most important things is what are you getting out of the box? So, when you select a hosting provider, you're picking a certain set amount of resources. You're picking a version of ColdFusion. Hopefully that version's still supported. And then you're expecting to get a tuned and optimized server that has all the latest security enhancements, updates. So, what's most important is ColdFusion up to date? Are all the latest patches applied? Are you running on the latest Java JDK framework? In addition to that, if you're buying a 16-core, let's just speak hypotheticals, 64 gigabyte of RAM server, what is ColdFusion configured to utilize? So if you just install ColdFusion by itself and forget it, that Java heap allocation is like 1 gigabyte. So you're not using all the resources that are available to you. Same goes with, making sure the hosting company you're speaking with understands your application needs. So right sizing that environment. How many requests per minute do you expect? What's the database intensity look like? What's the amount of ColdFusion requests you're getting? So there's a lot of aspects there, but just partnering with an organization that can help you, start in a good spot to begin with based on what you're buying, and then optimize and right size your environment as you continue, growing your own line of business.
Oh, those are great points. I mean, the other thing that's new in the last year or two is both Adobe and Lucy let you pick which components of ColdFusion get loaded. So if you're not using PDFs, for example, you don't have to load that. And if you're running in a kind of cloud environment or, dynamic scaling or orchestration, then it's quite important how big the footprint is of the install and how quickly it loads up. So I know both Adobe and Lucy have been making enormous speed ups in load time through that and other features.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned support earlier. That does seem to vary quite a lot between the different hosting options, not just the different hosting companies, though. I think there is variety there, but also in the different levels of, whether you're going with sort of shared hosting or a VPS or a dedicated server or whatever the option is. So, or even if you've, like you're saying, you've brought your own server and you've co-located it at a host. So tell us about how support works with all those different options and what we should look for when we're picking a host.
Yeah. So host support, your biggest support is going to be on the VPS. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The main reason is because it's got the perfect price point to be able to deliver the support. And the other reason is because it is a shared environment where it's not just a set it and forget it. So I'll contrast that with shared hosting. So in a shared environment, it's generally very low cost. And so it's extremely difficult to deliver the support to those customers at an enterprise level, because there's honestly just no profit in there, to be completely candid on that side of things. When you're doing the sub $10 or sub $20 hosting, there's no money in that per month to pay for the support on that. So you're gonna have a lot less support on that. When you get into more of the VPS or the cloud server side of things, that's going to be the price is going to be higher, and you're paying for that hands-on support. In our experience, developers don't want to worry about infrastructure; they just want it to work. They want to focus on the customer needs, and to be able to kind of deliver and develop to those customer needs. And so they're going to go to that supported product. And then when you go into actual co-located or dedicated physical boxes, a lot of times someone's getting that because they want to run it. And so they're preferring not to get the support packages because, okay, look, I just want the hardware and I want to do everything myself. And that's what they get. And so they've selected to not have that support package because of that.
That makes sense to me. I mean, I'd say to anyone listening, obviously some people have hobby sites or it's a nonprofit and they're like constrained by budget. And that's why they've picked shared hosting. And shared hosting was a great idea maybe 20 years ago because there weren't many other options available at the low end. But I'd say now, if you've got those kind of constraints, learn how to use Docker, learn how to do all this management of the server yourself. At least if it's on Docker, you can back up the image. And if something terrible happens, you can just restore the image from a backup. And then stick it on a cheap cloud provider like DigitalOcean, or there's several other, cheaper end cloud providers that are 25% of the cost of Amazon that still work good. So, and then you're going to have to live with the fact you're going to have to apply those patches yourself and deal with the site itself. Now, the advantage of Docker is you can have the same Docker image on your development box at home. So you've got some idea of what's going on. So, I don't like telling people not to whine because it sounds like I'm whining about their whining and it's like a meta level whine, but it's like, it's time to change how you think about hosting. And if you're looking for really cheap hosting, $10 a month, you can't expect to get good support at that level. It costs money to have support engineers that have decades of experience. So, and they need care and feeding to want to feel happy about doing it too. So,
yes,
in my experience, it's a tough job being a support engineer. I feel for them because they get all kinds of different people coming to them. Some are very friendly. Some are like tearing their hair out and they get upset. And, you've got to kind of do your best to help them out. So, hats off to all the people who do that. You wanted to say something about support engineers? Yeah.
Dakota, you want to jump in there?
Well, you nailed it on, I think it's, expertise, particularly even in ColdFusion, as that's more of a niche area, and the Lucy engines of the world, the expertise are becoming more and more limited. And then the demands are also rising at the same time. So, definitely partnering with any hosting organization, support engineers are definitely valued there. So,
and I will add one extra thing. I think Kishore talked about that with you, Michaela, when you guys chatted before. Is that if to kind of help increase the number of support engineers we have, there's CF Summit with their 1-day boot camp at the end. So jump on that. Not to just be purely Adobe focused, but I know the Ortus guys have theirs right after that as well. Or right on the same time. So there's multiple options that you can go to for really quality, inexpensive training on CFML.
Yeah, obviously to be a support engineer, you've got to understand ColdFusion to some extent, but you also have to understand a lot of server and hardware related stuff. So, and like I said, you've got to be able to be kind of even keeled when people get excited and help them feel that you're taking care of their issue. So good communication skills.
Definitely.
Let's talk a bit about, you mentioned ColdFusion upgrade protection earlier. How does that fit in with a host?
Yeah, I think any host you're working with, you want to feel insured or rest assured that when the next ColdFusion release cycle comes out, you'll have access to it. In addition to that, you don't want to find yourself stuck on a ColdFusion 10 or a ColdFusion 9 that's out of support and no longer, receiving critical updates or hot fixes that address vulnerabilities. So when you think about CF upgrade protection, you want to future-proof your environment. Where's my application going to be in 5 years or 10 years? Or so when you're partnering with an organization or a host, getting that CF upgrade protection is going to be really important.
What about folks who their app uses, special features in AWS? AWS has about 50 different libraries, I think, these days, and it's a very powerful thing. But if your app needs any of that, should we expect hosts to give you access to that, or how does that work?
Yeah, that is a great question. So, I think what we're seeing is kind of a trend shift. And I think I've even heard Adobe use some of this terminology, is that multi-cloud aspect. You shouldn't have to be, as a business owner or a developer or a CIO, you shouldn't have to be trapped with one hosting option or one provider. So when we think about the AWS or the Azures of the world, when there's a need for those specific resources or specific tooling and libraries, we want to be able to support that. So there's, to your point, there's no kind of lock-in or anything like that. You shouldn't do one or the other. You should keep all the options open to you. So
that makes sense. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, Michaela, I think you mentioned some of the work with Docker, with AWS, and their ability to kind of spin up things within like Kubernetes to control how many Docker images you have. And so if you're someone who kind of needs that, then you're going to make decisions on licensing for your ColdFusion. You're going to make decisions on a lot of things. And so you will need to have that support. But that may only be one application. You may have other applications who don't need that kind of Docker containers, and you may want to put those somewhere else. And so the question is, when you're choosing a partner out there, is okay, hey, does this partner have expertise in those areas? Can they support both? And then as a business owner, you got to make a decision if you want to have that one person supporting both, or kind of going two different people to kind of hedge your support. And so as a business, you just got to make that decision as you're talking to people.
Now, I'm going to say a word that frightens some people. It begins with B. It's backups. Is that something you should be looking at with a hosting provider? Or?
Absolutely not. I mean, don't worry about that.
Right. Yeah, that's
servers never go down.
Yeah.
Good.
Tell they do. No. That's something we talk about all the time, and it's so important to have a backup strategy. As you think of the multi-data center scenarios that we talked a little bit about earlier, anything can happen. So making sure you're partnering with someone or have your own strategy in place that says, okay, if I lose this all tomorrow, what's my recovery strategy? Or what's that disaster recovery scenario? So backups are really important. You should look at backups beyond just the website level, but your databases, even the ColdFusion settings can be really important because those contain things like data source information, etc. So always have a backup strategy in place is definitely important.
Yeah, I'd add to that. You have your DR, and then for disaster recovery, and then you even have local backups. So what happens if you just lose a file and you want to be able to have access to that file? And so having kind of a multi-tier approach to your backups, even multi-days of retention, so that you can, okay, hey, I deleted this file 3 days ago. Let me or I like that version better. Let me restore the 3 days ago version of it. And so as you're looking at your cloud provider, making sure you have access to something like that, especially in the development world where you may have made a decision and for whatever reason you're not you're not running your Git repository or something, or you didn't say that up to Git, and you want to have access to that, then you do have that ability if you have the days of retention.
Yeah, and I've seen people have 7, 14, or 30-day retention time, and they have daily backups. Sometimes people get more frequent backups running. Depends what's going on. Definitely good to have backups. Also, I've talked to people who had ransomware attacks and their server got kind of attacked by a hacker, and now they can't access the server. If you've got backups, it's like you're not paying them 10 Bitcoins or whatever they're asking for these days. You're just standing up a new VPS server. You're restoring from a backup from a few days prior when it wasn't infected. And, then you're back in business, and maybe you lost a few days data, but you didn't get as much egg on your face as you would if you didn't have that.
Yeah, I'll tell you, for coming from a past of doing the on-prem environments, it's amazing how many companies still rely on just tape backups for an on-prem environment and don't test them until they've had something like a ransomware attack, and then they test their restores and they don't work. And now all of a sudden they thought they've been protected for all this time, and they're not. So if you're going to be dealing with backups in any kind of DR environment, we encourage you to also have an ability to test those backups.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good idea. I mean, that's a good way to check that your disaster recovery plan really does cover everything and all the bits are all, backed up correctly. Because when you have a ransomware or you have a data center goes down or whatever, you need to be able to get the site up in a certain number of hours. And if you've never tested that, you don't know if it's going to all work out okay, and you don't know if maybe the place you're restoring to isn't set up right for some reason, or maybe the person who has all the passwords for switching the IP addresses is out on vacation, and you've got to have a backup for them. Or there's all kinds of snafus that can happen from what I've seen. Also, I mean, I don't know if this story's true, but I have heard of this was with tape backup. The junior developer was, they had the site go down. They told the junior developer to restore, and he thought he was restoring, but really he was erasing the tape. And they had 9 backups, and he was already through 8 of the backup tapes.
Oh no!
Before the more senior person stopped him from erasing the final backup. So, the other thing you did briefly mention, on-site versus off-site. On-site backups right at the data center, it's very quick to restore. But of course, if something terrible happens to the data center, you're SOL for getting that data back that day. So occasional, weekly or monthly or whatever your cadence is, have an offsite backup can be a good thing to do. And then the other layers that some people put in, having source control for the ColdFusion source, sticking the ColdFusion admin settings into source control, sticking your database structure into source control, and then having an offsite copy of the database, all can be good things to do. Or what you were saying with geolocation earlier, that effectively is a hot backup. Because you've got a copy of the site running in a different data center. I mean,
it is expensive though, and so as you're talking to, if you're a business owner or IT provider, you just got to balance those two. Where you're okay, hey, how much is it worth it for me to be able to come back, and how many hours? So hey, I need to be up in 4 hours. Or when we talk, we're in a lot of spaces, and so we talk to people about on-prem as well as just cloud backups to their on-prem environment. And for those people, we talk to them about, hey, if there's a disaster in your local area, does it matter if you're back up and running if all your customers are local? No, because they're all dealing with that local disaster. So you can take 4 days; it doesn't really matter. But if you're dealing with not having all your customers local, if you're not a local paint store or something like that, then you're dealing with people around the country. You can't be down. You still want to do some sales, maybe while you're dealing with a disaster of your fulfillment center or something. So you got to figure that out. And again, for these business providers, you just got to talk to a company who in any of these companies, there's a lot of companies you can talk to, but talk to the company who's had some experience and can kind of guide you into that.
No, I think that's a good point. I mean, this is true for most things in IT. There's usually some kind of trade-off happening. So although none of us want downtime, sometimes you've got to accept some downtime to trade off for the cost. It is interesting to me with all this Docker and container stuff. It kind of changes the game a bit because it's a lot easier just to spin up a Docker container very quickly, even in another data center, and even to automate that with either Kubernetes or some other orchestration software. So it does seem to have gone to a different place. Speaking of cool things that are happening, where do you see ColdFusion Hosting changing in the next year or two? Any ideas on trends you're seeing that might happen in the next few years? And be bold. Remember, we've had congressional testimony last week that said aliens have been found by the U.S. military and they have bodies in spaceships. So, yeah, I'm sure some amazing possibilities.
Yeah. I think
I've stunned you into silence.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you have to promise to provide it. I'm just saying what do you think's out there for any of the hosting companies?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think what immediately comes to mind is, we're seeing Adobe really pushing ColdFusion in the form of, the new CF certifications that you can get. I know the Ortis group that, and all their focus in both the ColdFusion and the Lucy community for modernizing code, the CF Alive podcast. There's a lot of traction and talk happening in ColdFusion. And I think that trend and kind of the community driven aspect of it is going to bring a lot more adoption towards developers and organizations who want to revisit ColdFusion and implement it in their their own code base or throughout their own processes. So I'm definitely hopeful we'll see more of a ColdFusion hosting trend. As far as where that lands, I think Adobe's stance on the multi-cloud approach and all the capabilities they're offering through that, whether it be Docker, your traditional VPS hosting, your shared environments, I think is also going to be really critical for adoption, continued adoption, and that's a trend I envision growing upward. Combine that with the annual release cycle and the new features they're adding around SAML support, the GraphQL capabilities. That's all very exciting stuff, and it's going to continue bringing momentum to the ColdFusion sector. So,
yeah, from a hosting perspective, I can see more combinations of hosting plus applications. So it's not just where you're going to go out there and say, "Hey, I want to spin up a VPS with ColdFusion." It's like, "Hey, I'm working with this partner. I actually need this specific application spun up with which is going to already have ColdFusion tuned for it. It's going to have the Windows environment or the Linux environment tuned for it for that application." And you can say, "Hey, I need this application." Boom. Now you're up and running. So these app providers will be able to more easily deploy solutions for customers. And then if they get better at templated setups, you could say, "Hey, do this, spin this up, and then just answer these questions." Now all of a sudden you're running with your ERP or your CMS or whatever it is. It's going to be a lot easier, and especially even Docker. And then you just throw a Docker out there of everything, and on it, and it's already everything already set up. So there's going to be a lot more work within that application side of kind of combination working with the hosting providers.
That sounds very exciting. So the other thing I see is more AI being utilized in ColdFusion hosting. We already have Fusion Reactor with some AI features to do the tuning on a more automated basis. I can imagine that happening for security stuff. We already have the security scanning tools, both built into Adobe ColdFusion. They have some code scanning things, but also there's the Foundio security tools. And I just see more of a kind of AI assistant that helps get your app more secure, more performance tuned.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Definitely.
Anything else you want to share with the listeners about picking a hosting company?
I mean, I always start at the end of the phone book. And I always start at the end of the phone book and work backwards is my general advice for picking a hosting provider. But all kidding aside, I mean, it's you have to balance what you're willing to pay and the support that you need and the features that you need. Every business is going to have to make decisions on balancing that. And so to kind of have an idea of, as you're getting into it, what it would mean to you to have someone take over your infrastructure and have an idea of, okay, hey, here are the price points I want. Here's kind of what I'm looking for. And then that'll help narrow down who your providers are. And then even look at the other side of things. If you're coming into it saying, I want to save a bunch of money, look at that, but then talk to one other person about a more expensive option. And then you understand that trade-off. When this is my personal, what I do is when I'm on Amazon or wherever I'm shopping, I mean, honest, it's Amazon. I'll sort price both directions. Some say, hey, look, show me the expensive stuff to say, okay, hey, if I want all the bells and whistles, where it's going to be. Okay, now let me just look at the other way. And okay, am I okay saving this amount of money and giving that up? Okay, no. Okay, let me keep going down until I find the point, which is my sweet spot, which, okay, hey, here's the price point I want and enough of the bells and whistles that I'm comfortable with it.
Makes sense to me. Anything you want to add, Dakota?
Yeah, Ryan, I think you nailed a lot of great points. Michaela, back to your earlier point early on in the episode is the security aspects. What is the most important, or what are these hosting providers doing to lock down your ColdFusion server, to deliver that out of the box, tuned and optimized, where it's really future-proofing and securing the application as you move it over. So
I also think support is pretty important for most developers. So it's a little hard to evaluate that because every hosting company says their support is wonderful, but
right.
Maybe you can tell. I mean, there've been discussions in the ColdFusion Programmer Facebook group that has 3,000 or 4,000 members in, and you can see what other people's experiences have been in there. So that's one way to measure it. Maybe there's some others out there as well.
And talk to other people. And if you're going to go with a hosting provider, ask them to if they don't have published audited reviews out there or independent reviews, I should say, then ask to talk to one of their customers. Or as you mentioned, there's the Slack community, there's the Facebook group, there's Reddit. Go to one of these social communities, and if you're considering somebody, throw their name out there and see what people say.
That's a great suggestion. Well, thanks for coming on the CF Alive podcast, guys. If people want to find you online and contact you, what are the best ways to do that?
So my name's easy. It's ryan.brown@xbyte.com. Actually, the hardest part is the company. So it's xbyte.com. You'll get me. You can look up Ryan Brown on LinkedIn. Michaela, you have my actual profile address. It's there. You can look at XByte Hosting on LinkedIn. We're there as well. One quick shameless plug, and just because Dakota's on here, and I can embarrass him. We had probably one of the greatest reviews ever given by somebody. And so, Michaela, I've shared you with that. If you care, you can share it, or you can look at the XByte Hosting LinkedIn page. But this company had a really big problem, and we put our top resource, our CTO, on it. And he gave probably the most colorful customer review ever. And I believe Dakota is now a 4th level ninja or something. I forget But yeah, he gave an amazing review. So check that out.
I'll put the link to that LinkedIn article with that review in the show notes at terratech.com. And also I'll give a link. I wrote a ColdFusion Hosting independent guide, which lists out a lot of the key points to look for and gives a lot of different hosting companies you can look at and other options. So I'll put that link in there as well. Great. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, and have fun at CF Summit. I know we're both sponsors there, so may CF Summit go well as well.
We will be there.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michaela.
Thanks a lot.
Get detailed show notes on today's episode and your free CF Alive Modern ColdFusion Guide at terratech.com. That is TERATECH.com. Viva la CF Alive Revolution!